A devastated millionaire businessman sits on a park bench after a heartbreaking loss when a 7-year-old homeless girl approaches carrying a pizza box rescued from the trash. With a radiant smile that contrasts sharply with her tattered clothes, she whispers, "Sir, would you like a slice? You look so sad." When he accepts, moved, and asks how she got the food, the girl's innocent reply leaves him in complete shock. The phone slipped from his trembling hand, landing with a dull thud on the dry leaves scattered across the park's concrete path. Arthur Sterling didn't move to pick it up. The device, a portal to his billion-dollar empire, now seemed a useless object, a dead weight like the feeling settling in his chest. The lawyer's words still echoed in his mind, cold and sharp as the autumn wind that whipped at his face. The decision is final. Arthur. She has full custody. Every syllable was a nail driven into the coffin of his hopes. For the first time in decades since his own mother's death, Arthur wept. The tears weren't loud or dramatic. They slid, silent and hot, down his cheeks, tracing a path of shame and regret on a face accustomed to showing only power and control. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves mingled with the greasy smell of hot dogs from a street cart across the road, a mundane combination that contrasted violently with the collapse of his inner world. He, the man who commanded boardrooms with a nod, who moved markets with a single order, was here, broken on a park bench, a king dethroned from a kingdom he himself had destroyed. Decades of family moments traded for endless meetings, Laura's birthdays forgotten in favor of quarterly closings, school plays missed for international flights. And for what? For a number in a bank account that now seemed like a sick joke. Guilt was a beast devouring him from the inside, showing him flashes of a little girl with golden curls begging for 5 more minutes of his attention, while he, impatient, glanced at his watch, already thinking about the next call, the next profit. That time would never come back. He had lost, not a deal, not a contract. He had lost the only thing that truly mattered. It was in this abyss of despair that a tiny presence made itself known. He felt a hesitant touch on his knee. Lowering his bleary eyes, he saw a little girl, not much older than Laura had been in those painful memories. Her hair was matted and her face smudged with soot, but her eyes were large and bright, fixed on him with a genuine concern. She held a stained pizza box with reverent care. With the devastating innocence only a child possesses, she whispered, her voice little more than a breath, "Mister, do you want a slice? You look really sad." Stunned, Arthur just stared at her, unable to form a response. The girl, taking his silence as permission, opened the box with a radiant smile, revealing 2 perfectly intact slices, the cheese still slightly warm. She offered them with a solemn gesture, as if presenting him with the greatest of treasures. Without thinking, moved by an impulse he didn't understand, he accepted a slice. The soft texture of the crust in his fingers was the first real thing he'd felt in hours. As he brought the pizza to his mouth, the words finally came out, hoarse and broken. "Thank you. Where did you get this?" The girl's answer hit him with the force of a gut punch, one that even losing custody of his daughter hadn't managed to deliver. She smiled, a pure, happy smile, and said, "I saw a guy throwing it in the trash can on the corner. I was so happy. I won't go to sleep hungry tonight." The cheese on the pizza tasted salty, but Arthur barely noticed. The salt dominating his palate was that of his own tears, which now flowed with renewed intensity. The girl's statement, so simple and so devastating, had opened a new wound, a shame so profound it made him want to disappear. He, with his luxury cars, his empty mansion, and his designer clothes, felt like the poorest of men before this small figure celebrating a treasure found in the trash. The pizza in his hand, once a gesture of kindness, now felt like an accusation. He chewed slowly, the mechanical act the only thing keeping him from shattering completely. The girl, whose eyes he now noticed were the color of honey, finished her slice quickly, licking her fingers with a relish Arthur hadn't felt for a meal in years. She watched him in silence for a moment, her head tilted like a curious bird. He hadn't stopped crying. Seeing this, she scooted closer on the bench, pressing her small body against his, a gesture of comfort no one had dared to make with the great Arthur Sterling in a long time. She then whispered, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind, "My dad used to say that when we're sad, we have to share it. Want to share your sad with me?" Those words, delivered with a child's earnestness, were the key that broke down the final door to his emotional fortress. It wasn't advice from an expensive therapist or a crisis management consultant. It was pure wisdom from an unexpected source. And he gave in. The dam broke. I lost my daughter," he choked out, the words strangled by a sob that finally escaped. "Not like that. She's alive, but I lost her. The judge, he said I'm not a good father, that I was never there, and he's right." The words tumbled out, a raw confession to a 7-year-old stranger on a park bench. He spoke of Laura, of her laugh he could barely remember, of the broken promises, of the obsession with work that had blinded him to his own daughter's growth. The girl listened with solemn attention, her honey-colored eyes never leaving his. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She just listened, offering the gift of her presence. When he finally fell silent, exhausted and empty, she remained quiet for a long moment. Then, she said with unnerving simplicity, "I don't have my dad either, or my mom. I don't know where they are." She gave a small shrug. "Sometimes I sleep here, sometimes under the bridge. But when I find food or a warm blanket someone threw out, I get really happy, because I know God hasn't forgotten me." Her philosophy, forged in absence and uncertainty, shamed Arthur to his core. He, who cursed his fate for a loss brought on by his own choices, felt small before her gratitude. Impulsively, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a wad of cash. "Take this," he said, his voice still hoarse. "Buy food, a coat, whatever you need." He held out the money, the solution he had always used for everything. But the girl recoiled, shaking her head with a firmness that surprised him. Her eyes widened with a kind of wary fear as she looked at the bills. "No, Mister, thank you," she said, her voice low and serious. "Money attracts bad people." Her refusal was so gentle, yet so absolute, that Arthur felt the weight of the money in his hand as if it were a burning coal. "Bad people," he repeated, his mind struggling to process her logic. To him, money was security, power, the solution to all problems. In this little girl's reality, it was a beacon for danger. He stuffed the bills back in his pocket, feeling like a fool. For the first time, his vast financial resources were not only useless but unwanted. He looked at her face, trying to understand. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than he remembered using in years. She seemed surprised by the question, as if no one ever bothered to ask. "It's Leah," she answered, almost in a whisper. Why do you prefer finding things in the trash to buying new food, Leah?" He had to understand. Her philosophy was a puzzle his logical, pragmatic mind couldn't assemble. Leah smiled, a genuine light illuminating her dirty features. "Because they're treasures," she said with the conviction of an explorer. "People throw away such good stuff. Yesterday I found a book with a ripped cover, but all the pages inside were perfect. It had a story about a talking horse. And the other day, a glove. Just one. But it was warm. To her, the world wasn't a place of scarcity, but an endless treasure hunt where joy was in the discovery, not the possession. Every word she spoke was a small chip at the foundation of everything Arthur believed. He had built an empire based on acquisition, on buying, on control. Leah found happiness in what was discarded, in what was forgotten. The night began to fall in earnest, and the cold air seeped through his expensive coat. A shiver ran through him, but he knew Leah in her thin, worn clothes. Must be feeling it far more. "Where are you going to sleep tonight, Leah?" he asked, the concern in his voice now palpable and real. She pointed vaguely past the park. "I think under the overpass by the river. The wind isn't as strong there. It's a good spot most of the time. It's only bad when the bad men show up." The mention was casual, said with the same nonchalance as her talk of the book or the glove. Arthur's heart stopped for a fraction of a second. "Bad men," he repeated, his throat suddenly dry. "What bad men?" Leah shrugged, fear finally flickering in her honey-colored eyes. "They hang out there sometimes. They smell like cigarettes and talk loud. They always want me to carry their little things in my pizza box or my bag. They say nobody suspects a little girl." She looked down at her own small, grimy hands. "I don't like it. They scare me. I always say no and run away." Arthur's world tilted on its axis. The abstract tragedy of hunger and homelessness suddenly took on a concrete, monstrous form. It wasn't just the cold or an empty stomach. It was evil, pure and predatory, circling her innocence like a shark, a cold, protective fury. An instinct he had failed to exercise with his own daughter washed over him completely. He looked at the small figure of Leah, shivering slightly in the biting wind, and the image of his own daughter, Laura, safe and warm in her bedroom, assaulted him. He had failed one, a resounding, legally stamped failure. But now, the universe, in its cruel irony, had placed another child in his path, one facing a danger Laura would never know. The question in his mind shifted instantly. It was no longer about his suffering, his loss, or his guilt. It was about the girl sitting next to him. He didn't know how. But he couldn't just get up and walk away. Letting her go to that overpass was not an option. He would not let her become another anonymous statistic, another discarded treasure for the world to devour. The decision formed in his mind with the clarity of a lightning strike. He would not leave her alone. However, executing that decision was completely unknown territory for him. Arthur Sterling was a man of plans, of corporate strategies, of hostile takeovers. Protecting a street kid from drug dealers was a problem for which his spreadsheets and lawyers offered no solution. "Leah," he said, his voice firm, trying to mask the uncertainty gnawing at him, "you're not sleeping under the overpass tonight." She looked up at him, distrust mingling with a spark of hope in her eyes. "I'm not," she asked, her voice fragile. "Where am I going?" The simplicity of the question disarmed him. He had no answer. Take her to his empty mansion. The idea was absurd. What would he do with her there? What would the staff say? And Laura? If his ex-wife, Helena, found out, it would be the perfect ammunition to prove he was unstable and reckless. He thought of a hotel. Yes, a hotel was neutral, safe. He could pay for a room for a few nights, get her food, new clothes. It was a clean, efficient solution, a business solution. "I'm taking you somewhere safe and warm," he said. Standing up, "You'll have a real bed and a hot bath." He held out his hand to her, but Leah didn't move. She looked at him with a wisdom that didn't belong to her years. "And after?" she asked. "After, do I have to go back to the overpass?" The question hit him like a punch. He was thinking of a temporary fix, a bandage for his conscience. She was thinking of the inescapable reality of her life. He didn't have an answer for after. As he wrestled with his dilemma, a white van pulled up on the street beside the park. Two uniformed employees got out, their faces a mixture of weariness and determination. They walked directly toward them. "Mr. Arthur Sterling," the woman asked, holding a clipboard, "we're with social services. We've received several anonymous tips about an unaccompanied minor being seen in this area. Often in your company these last few days." Arthur froze. Last few days? He had only just met her. The tips had to be about Leah, but his presence here, the rich, prominent man, had clearly complicated the situation. The man beside the social worker crouched down, trying to smile at Leah, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hi there, sweetie. We're here to help you. We're going to take you to a safe place, where you'll have other kids to play with. Leah's eyes widened in pure terror. She didn't see help or safety. She saw the threat she feared most. She clung to Arthur's pant leg, her body trembling violently. "No!" she whispered, her voice panicked. "Please, don't let them take me. They say it's bad there. They say the big kids hit the little ones and you get locked in. Please, mister, don't let them." Her plea was visceral, desperate. The state-run group homes had a terrible reputation, something even someone in Arthur's world had heard about in sporadic news reports. He looked at the impassive faces of the social workers, then at Leah's terrified face. The responsibility he now felt was crushing, a weight he had never experienced, not even in the highest pressure moments of his career. He was the only barrier between this girl and the fate she so dreaded. The woman with the clipboard looked at him impatiently. "Sir, please don't interfere. This is an official matter. Unless you're her legal guardian, you'll have to step aside." The phrase "legal guardian" echoed in his head, ironic and cruel. He had just been deemed legally irresponsible for his own child, and now it was his lack of a legal tie to Leah that left her vulnerable. He had the power and money to move mountains, but at that moment, facing bureaucracy and the law, he was impotent. The smell of disinfectant and paperwork seemed to emanate from the social workers, a sterile odor that clashed with the earthy scent of the park. Arthur felt Leah's grip on his leg tighten, her small nails digging into the expensive fabric of his slacks. That touch was an anchor, mooring him to a reality he couldn't ignore. He was at an impossible crossroads. On one side, logic and self-preservation screamed for him to walk away, to not get involved in a problem that wasn't his, that could further complicate his already fragile family situation. On the other, Leah's pleading eyes and the memory of his own failure as a father compelled him to act. He could not fail another child, not again. Taking a deep breath, he lifted his chin, reassuming the command posture that was so natural to him in boardrooms. "I understand you're doing your job," he said, his voice calm and controlled, but with an edge of steel. "However, the girl is frightened. Perhaps we can find a less traumatic solution." The social worker, whose name tag identified her as Mrs. Evans, raised an eyebrow. "And what solution would you suggest, sir? That she continue sleeping on the street, at the mercy of—" She paused, glancing around with disdain. "Just anyone." Her colleague, younger and seemingly more sympathetic, intervened. "Ma'am, our protocol is clear. The minor is at risk. She needs to be taken to a shelter immediately." Arthur felt time running out. He needed an alternative, something concrete to offer. The hotel idea returned, but he knew they wouldn't accept it. He needed something more official, more permanent. It was then that a distant memory surfaced. A charity project his company had sponsored years ago. A small, private children's home run by a firm but kind woman named Mrs. Gable. It was a small, family-like place, known for its individual care and attention. He barely remembered the details. It had been just another check signed to burnish the company's image. But now, that memory was a lifeline. "I am one of the primary benefactors of the Beacon House," he said, hoping the name sounded as impressive to them as it did in his head. "I know the director, Mrs. Gable. I'm certain she can make an exception and take Leah in immediately, in an environment we already know and trust." Miss Evans looked skeptical, but the name of the home seemed to register. The Beacon House. It's a respected institution, but they have a massive waiting list, and they operate independently. "Leave that to me," Arthur said, already retrieving the phone he'd dropped. The screen was cracked, but it worked. His fingers flew through his contacts, searching for his PR manager, the man who liaised with these institutions. As the phone rang, he could feel everyone's eyes on him. Leah's, filled with terrified hope, the social workers with professional suspicion. The call was answered on the second ring. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Marcus, I need the personal contact for Mrs. Gable at the Beacon House. It's urgent, an emergency." There was a brief pause. "Of course, sir. One moment." The wait was agonizing. Every second stretched into an eternity. Finally, Marcus texted the number. Arthur dialed, his heart hammering against his ribs. A brisk, elderly female voice answered. "The Beacon House, Mrs. Gable speaking." He introduced himself, his voice more humble than it had been in years. He explained the situation quickly and concisely, omitting the sordidest details, focusing on Leah's urgent need. He heard Mrs. Gable's breath on the other end of the line. "Mr. Sterling, I remember your generosity, but we have rules. I can't just take a child off the street without the proper documentation and going through official channels." Despair began to set in again. He was about to fail. He glanced at Leah, who was staring at him with an intensity that broke his heart. He couldn't give up. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that surprised even himself. "I will take full financial and legal responsibility, whatever it takes. I just need a safe place for her. Please." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence that held Leah's fate. Mrs. Gable's silence stretched on, heavy and thick as the fog beginning to form in the park. For Arthur, every second was torture. He imagined the cold, bureaucratic no, the door slamming in his face, leaving him back at square one. The social workers were already starting to shift impatiently. Miss Evans crossed her arms, a clear sign that his time was up. But then Mrs. Gable's voice came through, not with the coolness he feared, but with a thoughtful tone. "Mr. Sterling, your voice. It sounds different, not like the man I spoke with at that charity dinner 3 years ago." The personal observation caught him off guard. She wasn't just assessing the situation, she was assessing him. "I am different," he admitted, the confession slipping out before he could stop it. "Life has changed me." Another pause, then the decision. "Bring the girl, but I need you to come with her and sign a temporary guardianship waiver. And tomorrow morning, first thing, I want social services here to regularize everything. I won't break the rules, but I will bend them for one night, for her safety, and for the tone in your voice." Overwhelming relief flooded Arthur, so powerful his legs felt weak. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable. Thank you so much. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to Mrs. Evans, his face now a mask of unshakable confidence. "It's handled. Mrs. Gable is expecting her at the Beacon House. She has requested you be there tomorrow morning to formalize the emergency placement." Ms. Evans looked genuinely surprised, even a little impressed. She exchanged a look with her partner, who gave a slight nod. The reputation of Mrs. Gable and her home was impeccable. "Very well, sir. We'll be there at 9 a.m., but this is highly irregular." She made a note on her clipboard, and with one last suspicious look at Arthur and a softer glance at Leah, the two turned and left. The white van drove away, leaving a sudden silence in the park. Leah, who had been holding her breath through the entire negotiation, finally let it out in a small whoosh. She looked up at him, not with terror anymore, but with an awe that made him feel like both a hero and a fraud. He had done nothing but use his name and his money, the very tools that had led him to lose his own daughter. On the way to his car, Leah held his hand. Her fingers were small and cold, but her grip was firm. It was the first time in a very long time he had felt the willing touch of a child. The sensation was strange, uncomfortable, and yet deeply comforting. He helped her into his luxury sedan, the cream leather and polished wood interior, a stark contrast to her worn clothes. She looked around with wide eyes, touching the soft seat as if it were the most precious thing in the world. During the drive, the silence was broken by Leah's voice. "The lady on the phone, does she seem nice?" "Yes, Leah, she seems very nice," Arthur replied, keeping his eyes on the road. The truth was, he was as nervous as she was. He was stepping into a completely new world, guided only by a newfound instinct. As he drove, his phone buzzed. A social media notification from his ex-wife, Helena. He ignored it, but the next vibration was a text from his daughter. Laura. His heart leaped. She never contacted him directly. With trembling hands, he opened the message at a red light. The text was short, sharp, and filled with a teenage fury he had no idea how to face. "Mum showed me, so this is it. You replace me with the first street kid you find. What a joke. I hope you're happy with your new family." A picture was attached. Someone in the park, an anonymous bystander, had snapped a photo of him and Leah on the bench. The image, posted by a local gossip site, already had hundreds of shares. With the caption, "Tycoon Arthur Sterling's fatherly moment with a mystery girl just hours after losing custody of his own daughter. Midlife crisis or PR stunt?" The phone screen seemed to burn in his hand. The battle he thought he'd won in the park was just the beginning. He had saved Leah from one immediate danger, but in doing so, he might have just destroyed the last fragile bridge connecting him to Laura. The impact of Laura's message was like a physical blow. The air seemed to be sucked from his lungs, and the world outside the luxury car became a blur of lights and shadows. He'd spent the last hour focused on solving an external problem, Leah's safety, only to be ambushed by an internal crisis far more devastating. His daughter's accusation, raw and full of pain, echoed the voice of his own guilt. Was he, in fact, trying to be the father to Leah that he'd never been to Laura? Was this an act of redemption or a form of masochistic self-punishment? Leah, sensing the change in his expression, fell silent in the passenger seat. She seemed to feel the weight in the atmosphere, shrinking back a little, as if afraid she'd caused the problem. Her sensitivity was another stab to Arthur's heart. This child, who had nothing, was more attuned to his emotions than he had ever been to his own daughter's. He put the phone away, his hand shaking. He needed to focus. He needed to get Leah to the safety of the home. The pain over Laura would have to wait. Their arrival at the Beacon House was discreet. It was a large, old, and lovingly converted house, surrounded by a well-tended garden that felt like an oasis in the middle of the city. There were no ostentatious signs, just a small, wrought-iron gate. Mrs. Gable was waiting for them at the door. She was a woman in her 70s, with white hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that seemed to see through all pretense. She looked at Arthur, then at Leah, and her face instantly softened at the sight of the girl. "Welcome, my dear," she said to Leah, ignoring Arthur for a moment. "My name is Elvira Gable. You'll be safe here." Leah, shy, hid behind Arthur's leg, but there was no fear in her eyes, only caution. Mrs. Gable led them inside to a simple but warm office. As she prepared the guardianship waiver, Arthur listened to the sounds of the house, children's laughter in the distance, the smell of vegetable soup from the kitchen. It was a home, a real one. He signed the papers without reading them, the gesture mechanical. His mind was miles away, in the mansion where Laura was probably reading vicious online comments about him. Mrs. Gable brought him back to reality. "I'll take care of her, Mr. Sterling, one of our caregivers. Rosa, we'll get her a bath and some clean clothes. Then she'll have dinner." She turned to Leah. "We have vegetable soup and warm bread. Do you like that?" Leah nodded, her eyes shining at the mention of food. For the first time, she let go of Arthur's hand and took a hesitant step toward Mrs. Gable. It was a turning point, a transfer of trust. Arthur felt a sudden emptiness in his hand and in his chest. His mission was accomplished. He was, once again, superfluous. I should go, then," he said, his voice uncertain. Mrs. Gable fixed him with her penetrating gaze. "You're not going anywhere. I need some more information. And frankly, you look like you're about to collapse. Sit down. I'll have a cup of tea brought for you." Caught off guard by the command, he obeyed. A smiling woman named Rosa appeared and, with a gentleness that calmed even Arthur, took Leah by the hand. Before she left, Leah turned and looked back at him. "Will you come back to see me?" she asked, her small voice full of a fragile hope. The simple question hit him with unexpected force. He hadn't thought beyond this night. Come back, be a part of her life. The image of Laura's text flashed in his mind. To come back would be to confirm her accusations. To not come back would be to abandon her. I'll be back, Leah, he promised, the words out before he could think about the consequences. The smile she gave him in return was one of such pure relief it lit up the entire hallway. That was the moment everything changed. The promise, made impulsively, had sealed his fate. This was no longer an isolated act of charity. It was the beginning of a commitment. He was no longer just helping a street kid. He was becoming entangled in her life, and in doing so, he was declaring war on his past, on his ex-wife, and maybe even on his own daughter. The decision to return wasn't logical. It wasn't calculated. It was a response to a smile, to a basic human need not to be forgotten. In that instant, in the simple office of a children's home, Arthur Sterling, the master of mergers and acquisitions, had just made the riskiest and most irrational deal of his life. He had traded the possibility of reconciliation with his past for the uncertain hope of a future with purpose. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, there was no going back. The cup of tea Mrs. Gable had offered him sat untouched on the wooden desk. Steam rose in delicate spirals, but Arthur could only feel the chill emanating from within him. The promise to Leah echoed in his head, a contract signed with the heart, not a pen. He sat in silence as Mrs. Gable asked practical questions: where Leah was found, what he knew of her family, any names she had mentioned. He answered in monosyllables, his mind still reeling from the gravity of his choice. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Gable said, setting down her pen and folding her hands on the desk, "I see many men like you, rich, powerful, who reach a certain age and realize the castle they've built is cold and empty. They try to fill that void with charity, with generous checks. But Leah doesn't need a check. She needs consistency. That promise you made to her, it was the most important thing she's heard in a long time. If you break it, the damage will be worse than if you'd never found her at all." The warning was direct, unvarnished. She wasn't thanking him for his future financial aid. She was holding him accountable for the girl's emotional well-being. This was new for Arthur. People usually flattered him, feared his anger, or coveted his money. No one dared to give him a moral lecture. "I won't break it," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "But I don't know what to do." "No one does at first," she replied with a half-smile. "Being a parent, being present, it's not a position you assume. It's a craft you learn, one day at a time. Start simple. Come back tomorrow. Bring a book, or just sit with her in the garden. Presence is the most valuable gift." The simplicity of the advice calmed him. One step at a time. He could do that. At least, he thought he could. The next day's visit was awkward. He arrived at the agreed-upon time, dressed in more casual clothes, trying to look less corporate. He found Leah in the garden, sitting on a swing. She looked different. A bath had revealed her hair was a light, dusty brown. She wore a simple, donated dress and sandals. She was clean, but she seemed smaller, more fragile, without the layer of soot that had protected her. She saw him and gave a shy smile. He sat on a nearby bench, unsure of what to say. He, who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, didn't know how to talk to a 7-year-old. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, the question sounding formal and stilted. "Yes, the bed was soft, and nobody told me to leave," she answered, swinging gently. The silence returned. It was Leah who broke it. "Are you still sad?" The direct question caught him off guard. "Yes, Leah, a little." "Is it because of your daughter?" He nodded, unable to speak. "She doesn't like me, does she? I saw it on the TV in the dining hall. The man said you found me on the street, and he showed your picture with a pretty girl. I think that was her." The innocence with which she relayed the fact made it all the more painful. The war he feared had already begun, and Leah was right in the middle of it. The social pressure he'd always dismissed with contempt now hit him personally. The neighbors in his wealthy enclave, always so cordial, now looked at him differently when he went for a walk. He heard the whispers, saw the sideways glances. The news of his breakdown and the street child had spread like wildfire. One day, arriving home, he found a formal letter from his homeowners association in his mailbox. The letter, couched in polite but unequivocal terms, expressed the community's concern over his recent eccentric activities and association with undesirable elements, threatening legal action if the situation was not resolved and the neighborhood's reputation preserved. It was a declaration of war from his own community. They didn't see a man trying to help a child. They saw an anomaly threatening their property values. Torn between his loyalty to Leah and the pressure from a world he had helped build, Arthur felt increasingly isolated. With every visit to the home, his bond with the girl strengthened. He discovered she was curious, intelligent, and had a quirky sense of humor. But every smile from Leah seemed to dig a deeper chasm between him and his old world. His ex-wife, Helena, used the situation with surgical precision. She would call him not to scream, but to speak with feigned concern, telling him how Laura was suffering, how she felt replaced and publicly humiliated. Every word was a knife twisted in the wound. He was losing on all fronts, and in the midst of it all, Leah, unknowingly, presented him with a new challenge, a revelation that would complicate everything even further. It happened on a rainy afternoon during the third week. The rain kept the children from the garden, and the beacon house was filled with a contained energy. Arthur found Leah in the small library, a cozy room with shelves full of donated books. She wasn't reading. She was sitting at a small table with a piece of scrap paper and a pencil stub, her brow furrowed in concentration. He approached quietly, curious to see what so absorbed her. On the paper were not drawings of houses or flowers, as he might have expected from a child. There were numbers, long columns of numbers, complex multiplication and division problems that would make an adult reach for a calculator. He watched, fascinated, as she solved a long division problem with a 3-digit divisor, muttering the calculations to herself with stunning speed. She wasn't copying from a book. She seemed to be creating the problems and solving them for sheer pleasure. "Leah, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice soft so as not to startle her. She looked up, a little embarrassed, as if caught doing something wrong. "Just playing a game," she said, trying to cover the paper with her hands. "I like playing with numbers. They make sense." He gently took the sheet. What he saw baffled him. It wasn't just arithmetic. There were concepts that bordered on basic algebra, sequences and patterns that indicated a logical reasoning far advanced for her age. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, astonishment clear in his voice. "Nobody taught me," she answered, shrugging. "I used to watch through school windows. I'd look at the blackboards, and sometimes I find old newspapers with the sections that have numbers and puzzles. I try to figure out how they work." The revelation left him speechless. This girl, who had never set foot in a classroom, who had learned to read from scraps of newspaper and to calculate by peering through fences, possessed a raw, extraordinary gift for mathematics. It was a pure talent, a brilliant mind that had blossomed in the harshest conditions. Like a rare orchid growing in a crack in a rock, a wave of indignation and sorrow washed over him. How much potential did the world waste every day? How many Leahs were out there with incredible gifts that would never be discovered? In that moment, his mission changed yet again. It was no longer just about giving Leah safety and affection. It was about giving her a chance, an opportunity to develop that incredible gift. He knew the Beacon House was a safe haven, but it wasn't a school for the gifted. Leah's mind needed stimulation, challenges, teachers who could nurture her talent, the idea began to form, audacious and complex. He could enroll her in a private school, the best in the city, hire tutors, give her every tool money could buy, but reality hit him like a brick wall. Leah didn't officially exist. She had no birth certificate, no records, no school history. To the system, she was a ghost. To enroll her anywhere, she would need a legal identity, and for that, she would need a legal guardian. The path to helping her realize her potential led him directly back to the issue of custody, a legal and emotional minefield he had just navigated and lost, humiliatingly. The irony was cruel. To give Leah a future, he would have to fight for her in the very same courts that had judged him an unfit father. The battle would not just be against bureaucracy, but against his own past, against the public image Helena and the media had built of him. It would be a difficult, expensive, and humiliating fight. But looking at the girl, absorbed in her calculations, oblivious to the turmoil she had just created in his mind, Arthur knew he had no choice. He had to try. The decision, however, came with an immediate price. Returning home that night, energized by a new purpose, he found an envelope from his lawyer on his desk. Inside was a formal motion from Helena, petitioning for a mandatory psychological evaluation for him, citing his erratic behavior and obsession with a street child as proof that he posed an emotional risk to Laura. The war had escalated to a new level. Helena was no longer just attacking him in the media. She was using the legal system to try and prove he was mentally unstable. The official paper in his hand felt cold and hostile. The words mandatory psychological evaluation and emotional risk danced before his eyes, a formalized accusation that turned Helena's smear campaign into a tangible legal threat. Arthur felt a wave of impotent rage, followed by a profound weariness. He was fighting a war on two fronts, one to build a future for Leah and one to defend himself from his past. And the two battles were dangerously intertwined. In the days that followed, the weight of the situation began to take its toll. His visits with Leah, once a refuge, were now tinged with anxiety. He would look at her, see her potential shining, and feel the crushing weight of the obstacles that separated them from a decent future. He started bringing her math books and logic puzzles. The joy and speed with which she devoured each new challenge were both his greatest motivation and his greatest source of anguish. It was like finding a pure spring in the desert and having only a thimble to carry the water. During the 5th week, the crisis deepened in a way he hadn't anticipated. He arrived at the Beacon House on a cold, damp afternoon to find the place unusually quiet. Mrs. Gable intercepted him in the hall, her face creased with worry. "It's Leah," she said, her voice low. "She's not well. She has a high fever and a cough that won't quit." The doctor came to see her. "It looks like pneumonia." Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Pneumonia, but she's safe here. She's eating well. Chronic malnutrition and years of exposure have left her immune system severely weakened. "Arthur," Mrs. Gable explained, using his first name for the first time. "Her body is paying the price for years of neglect. She's fighting, but it's a hard fight." He rushed to the home's small infirmary. Leah was lying in a bed, her face pale and sweaty, her breathing short and labored. She looked even smaller and more fragile than when he had first found her. Her eyes, normally so bright, were clouded with fever. When she saw him, she tried to smile, but the effort ended in a coughing fit that left her breathless. "Sorry for being trouble," she whispered, her voice a thread. Those words broke him. The disturbing maturity in that one sentence, the idea that her own illness was an inconvenience to others, revealed the deep scars that life on the street had left. She had learned to be invisible, to not ask, to not be a burden. And even now, sick and suffering, her primary concern was not to bother anyone. He sat beside the bed, taking her feverish hand. "You are no trouble at all, Leah. You just need to focus on getting better. I'm here." For the next few days, he barely left her side. He delegated all his business responsibilities, ignored the furious calls from his lawyers about Helena's motion, and just stayed, reading to her, moistening her lips, just being a constant presence. He was seeing firsthand the fragility of a life he had always taken for granted. The crisis came to a head on a Saturday afternoon. Leah was asleep, her breathing a little easier, and Arthur had stepped out for a moment to get coffee from the home's canteen. When he returned, he found a figure standing in the infirmary doorway, blocking his path. It was Laura. His daughter stood there, her face a mask of anger and pain. Beside her, impassive, stood Helena. The scene paralyzed him. The collision of his two worlds, the one he had so dreaded, was happening right here, in the quiet hallway of a children's home. Outside the room where a sick little girl was fighting for breath, Laura took a step forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Her voice, when she spoke, was loud and trembling, cutting through the silence of the place. "So it's true," she said, contempt dripping from every word. "You really did it. You abandoned us, your real family, for a stranger, for some random street kid. I can't believe you'd rather be in here, holding her hand, than fighting for me." The public accusation, the humiliation in front of her mother, the raw pain in her voice, it all hit him with the force of a wave. And worst of all, over Laura's shoulder, he saw that the infirmary door was slightly ajar, and Leah's eyes, now wide open and filled with a devastating understanding, were fixed on him. The echo of Laura's words hung in the hallway, dense and poisonous. For Arthur, time seemed to freeze. He was trapped in the crossfire between his biological daughter's accusing stare and the wounded gaze of the girl he had promised to protect. Leah's heart, already weakened by illness, seemed to break before his very eyes, and he felt utterly powerless to stop it. The sound of his own pain was one thing. Witnessing the pain he had inadvertently caused her was a torture of a different order. Helena, seeing that Laura's words had hit their mark, stepped forward. Placing a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder, her face was a study in false compassion. "Laura, honey, I told you we shouldn't have come. Your father has clearly made his choice." The sentence was designed to cement the divide, to frame the situation as a binary, irrevocable choice. Either Laura or Leah, his past or his future. Arthur found his voice, hoarse and strained. "Helena, Laura, this isn't the place. We're in a children's home, and Leah is very sick." "Ah, yes, the poor sick girl," Helena retorted, sarcasm dripping from her voice. "The perfect excuse for your negligence. Did you know the hearing for your psychological evaluation has been scheduled? Your lawyer can't seem to find you. I suppose he didn't think to look here at your new home." Laura, for her part, seemed shaken by her own outburst. The tears she'd been holding back now streamed freely. "And I just wanted to understand, Dad. Why wasn't I enough?" The question, stripped of anger and filled with a child's vulnerability, was what finally broke Arthur's paralysis. He took a step toward her, his hands outstretched in a silent plea. "Laura, it was never about you not being enough. It was about me not being enough. I failed you. I made terrible mistakes, and none of this is her fault." He gestured toward the infirmary door, but it was too late. Laura shook her head, retreating to her mother's side. "No, you didn't fail. You chose, and you chose her." With that, she turned and ran down the hall, her sobs echoing off the walls. Helena shot Arthur one last look of cold triumph before following her daughter. Left alone in the hallway, Arthur felt an emptiness so profound it nearly buckled his knees. He had lost the chance to explain himself, lost what little remained of his relationship with Laura. The public humiliation, the confrontation, it had all been a disaster. He turned slowly to the infirmary door. Leah's gaze met his. The understanding in her eyes was what hurt the most. She didn't look angry or betrayed. She looked resigned, as if this were just another confirmation that she was a problem, a burden who caused pain wherever she went. He walked in and sat on the edge of her bed. "Leah, I am so sorry you had to hear that." She looked away, staring at the wall. "She's right," she whispered, her voice weak from illness and sorrow. "You should be with her. She's your real daughter." "You're important to me too, Leah," he said, his voice cracking. "No, I'm not," she answered, a single tear tracing a path down her temple and into her hair. "I'm just a problem. I make you sad. I make your daughter cry. I get sick, and I'm trouble. It would be better if you'd never found me." Her words, born of a deep hopelessness, were the final spark. Arthur's pain, frustration, and rage finally found a focus. He wasn't angry at Helena, or Laura, or the world. He was angry at the injustice that had taught a 7-year-old child she didn't deserve to be loved. A fierce clarity took hold of him. The doubts, the hesitations, the concern for his reputation, it all dissolved. He couldn't fix his past with Laura in a single day, but he could, and would, fight for Leah's future. He would not let her believe that terrible lie. "Listen to me, Leah," he said, his voice low but vibrating with an intensity that made her look at him. "You are not a problem. You are a gift. Your brain, your courage, your heart, they are a gift. And I will not let anyone, not even you, believe otherwise. We are going to get through this. You are going to get well, and I am going to fight for you, no matter what it costs." In that moment, the battle ceased to be about him, about his redemption or his guilt. It became about her, and that shift in focus gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He finally had a cause worth losing everything for. The promise made at Leah's bedside solidified Arthur's determination into a kind of purposeful armor. The girl's illness, paradoxically, became the catalyst that incinerated his last hesitations. While Leah fought pneumonia over the next week under the watchful care of Mrs. Gable and the doctors, Arthur waged his own battle on a different field. He hired the best legal team money could buy, not to defend himself, but to go on the offensive. His instruction was clear: begin the process of adopting Leah immediately. His lawyers were stunned. "Arthur, this is professional and legal suicide," said his lead counsel, a man who had known him for 20 years. "D, you have a pending motion for a psychological evaluation. Your ex-wife is building a case for instability against you. To petition for the adoption of an undocumented child under these circumstances, the judge will laugh you out of court." "Then find a judge who won't laugh," Arthur replied, his voice like ice. "Use every resource. Find a loophole. Argue necessity. I don't care about the cost or my reputation. This girl's life depends on it." News of his intent to adopt Leah leaked to the press, as he knew it would. The story exploded, painting him as an eccentric billionaire in the throes of a breakdown, trying to buy a new family after losing his own. Helena used the news with brutal effectiveness, giving an exclusive interview where, with tears in her eyes, she spoke of her deep concern for Arthur's mental state and the traumatic impact of his actions on Laura. The climax arrived in the 7th week after his first meeting with Leah in the park. 3 events converged on the same day, creating a perfect storm. First, Leah's health took a drastic turn for the worse. The infection, resistant to antibiotics, required a transfer to a specialized hospital with a pediatric intensive care unit. Second, the bureaucracy finally caught up with him. A court order arrived at the Beacon House, authorizing social services to transfer Leah to a state-run hospital in a neighboring state, one that had an agreement with the foster care system and was, according to the document, better equipped. It was a death sentence disguised as logistics. Separated from him and Mrs. Gable in a strange environment, he knew Leah's fighting spirit could be extinguished. Third, the adoption hearing. which his lawyers had managed to schedule in record time, was set for that very afternoon. It was his one desperate chance to stop the transfer. The courtroom was tense. On one side, Arthur and his team. On the other side were the representatives from social services and, to his surprise, Helena's lawyer, present as an interested party due to the implications for Laura's well-being. The judge, an older man with an air of infinite weariness, looked over the paperwork with obvious skepticism. The lawyer for social services was clinical and efficient. He presented Leah as a minor at risk, with no known familial ties and complex medical needs requiring state intervention. He presented Arthur as a well-intentioned but emotionally compromised and legally unsuitable benefactor, himself subject to proceedings questioning his stability. When it was Arthur's turn, his lawyer presented a passionate case, talking about Leah's talent, the bond they had formed, and the resources Arthur could offer. But the words felt hollow against the coldness of the law. The judge seemed unmoved. It was then that Arthur realized the traditional approach wouldn't work. He stood up, to the astonishment of his own lawyers. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. Arthur didn't talk about Leah's potential or his money. He talked about his own bankruptcy. "Your Honor, everything the state's attorney said about me is true. I was an absent father. I prioritized work over my family. I failed, and I lost custody of my daughter because of it. I'm not here today asking for a second chance to be the father I wasn't. I'm not trying to replace my daughter." He paused, his voice cracking. "I'm here because this little girl, Leah, has taught me more about humanity in 7 weeks than I've learned in 50 years. She taught me about resilience, about gratitude, and about the danger of feeling like a burden. The greatest threat to her life right now isn't the pneumonia, it's hopelessness. It's believing she doesn't matter. Transferring her away from the only 2 people she trusts, myself and Mrs. Gable, will confirm her greatest fear. I'm not asking to be her father, I'm begging you to let me be her safe harbor." In the middle of his speech, the courtroom doors flew open. One of his aides ran in, his face pale. He whispered something in the ear of Arthur's lawyer. The lawyer blanched and rose. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess. We have an emergency. Leah, she's gone into respiratory arrest. They're trying to resuscitate her at the hospital." Arthur's world collapsed. The air left the room. The sound in his ears turned into a high-pitched whine. The legal battle no longer mattered. He could lose everything, but the only thing that mattered was that Leah lived. The news of Leah's respiratory arrest electrocuted the courtroom, turning legal formality into a chaos of raw emotion. The judge, momentarily stripped of his robe of impartiality, showed genuine alarm on his face. Helena's lawyer had the decency to look shocked, but Arthur saw none of it. He was already moving, a blur of panic and desperation toward the door, his speech unfinished, the hearing forgotten. His only thought was to get to the hospital. The drive was a torture of imaginary sirens and endless red lights. He arrived at the hospital and ran through the sterile white hallways, following signs for the PQ. He found Mrs. Gable in the waiting room, her aged face etched with anguish, her hands twisting a handkerchief. They took her into the procedure room. Her heart stopped. "Arthur, they've been trying for almost 10 minutes. 10 minutes. An eternity." He leaned against the wall, his legs giving way, and slid to the floor. The image of Leah, her shy smile, her concentration on the numbers, her whisper of, "I don't want to be trouble," flashed through his mind in a whirlwind of pain. He had failed. Despite all his money, power, and newfound determination, he had failed to protect her. Time crawled by, each tick of the wall clock a hammer blow to his chest. Finally, a doctor appeared, his face tired but calm. "We got her back. Her heart is beating again. She's sedated and intubated, but she's stable." It was a close call. "The infection is very aggressive, but she's a fighter." A collective sigh of relief filled the small space. Arthur felt the tears he didn't know he was holding stream freely. As he was absorbing the news, a hesitant figure appeared at the entrance to the waiting room. It was Laura, alone. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was clutching a small teddy bear. She saw him on the floor and stopped, uncertain. Mrs. Gable, with quiet wisdom, stood and went to get a coffee, leaving them alone. Laura approached slowly and sat in the chair beside him, not looking at him. "Mom called me, told me what happened in court and about Leah," she said, her voice low and shaky. I didn't want this to happen. I was angry and hurt, but I never wanted her to." She couldn't finish the sentence. A sob cut her off. Arthur, still stunned, just listened. "When you were talking in court, Mom's lawyer called her. He had it on speaker. I heard what you said, that you failed me, that you weren't trying to replace me." She finally turned to him, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored his own. "Is it true? Do you really think it was your fault?" "Every single bit of it, Laura," he answered, his voice hoarse. "I was the adult. I was the father. My job was to be there, and I wasn't. Nothing you felt or did was wrong. It was a reaction to my absence." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer heavy and accusatory, but fragile and reflective. Laura held out the teddy bear. "I brought this for her. It's Mr. Cuddles. He got me through a lot of scary nights when I was little." The simple gesture, the offering of her own childhood comfort, was a peace treaty. It was an acknowledgement that Leah's pain was real, that she was a child, not a concept or a rival. In that moment, in the sterile hallway of a hospital, the healing began, not a complete, magical cure, but the first and hardest step. The courtroom door opened again, metaphorically. Arthur's lawyer appeared, his face a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "Arthur, the judge, he was moved by what happened, by your speech. He's issued an emergency order. The transfer to the other state is suspended, and he's granted you temporary legal guardianship of Leah, with the condition that she remains under Mrs. Gable's care as a co-guardian until her legal status is permanently resolved." He said that sometimes the law has to recognize that family is more than just blood. It's about who shows up when someone's heart stops. The legal victory, which had once seemed like the highest mountain, now felt secondary compared to the small truce reached with his daughter. He had won in court, but the real victory was the teddy bear offered in the waiting room. He looked at Laura, who gave a small, hesitant smile. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with difficult conversations and wounds to heal. But for the first time, the road existed. He hadn't lost Laura to gain Leah. Somehow, in the middle of the worst crisis of his life, he had found a way to have them both. 7 weeks, an entire lifetime. That's how long it took for Arthur Sterling's world to be demolished and rebuilt on a completely new foundation. The autumn that had begun with the grey of despair now gave way to a winter that, though cold, promised the clarity of the crisp, clean air. The city park, once the stage of his greatest defeat, had become the setting of his redemption. He and Leah were sitting on the same bench where it all began. The air still carried the scent of damp leaves, but today it also had the sweet aroma of hot chocolate from 2 paper cups they held. Leah was no longer wrapped in dirty rags. She wore a bright red wool coat, a gift from Laura, and in her lap was not a rescued pizza box, but an advanced mathematics textbook, its pages caressed with reverence. Her recovery had been slow and arduous, but the combination of top-tier medical care, Mrs. Gable's tireless love, and Arthur's constant presence had worked a miracle. Most importantly, Leah's will to live had returned, stronger than ever, fueled by the certainty that she mattered. "Problem 14 is tricky," she said, wrinkling her nose. "It involves variables I haven't quite figured out yet. But I think if I apply the theorem Mr. Henderson taught me." She spoke of her new tutor with infectious enthusiasm. Arthur listened. a genuine smile on his face. The adoption had been finalized. Leah Sterling now had a name, a home, a birth certificate, and a future that burned with the fire of her extraordinary intellect. But Arthur's transformation was perhaps the most profound. He had sold his majority stake in the company, keeping only enough to live comfortably and to fund his new project, the Found Treasures Foundation. The foundation's headquarters was the new community center built right there by the park, a modern, welcoming building that offered shelter, food, and educational and psychological support for homeless children. It was a place where other Leahs could be found before the world discarded them. From time to time, a group of children would come out of the center to play in the nearby playground. Leah watched them with an understanding eye. "That boy, Peter, he reminds me of me. He always thinks he's being a bother." She then got up, walked over to the group, and with the patience of someone who's been there, began to explain a game to the shy boy. Arthur watched her, his heart overflowing with a paternal pride that was both new and ancient. The relationship with Laura was still a work in progress. There was no fairy tale ending. The wounds were deep, the trust fragile. Laura hadn't completely forgiven him, and perhaps she never would. But there was progress. She called. They talked. Last weekend, she had come to visit and spent an hour trying and failing to help Leah with a logic problem, the two of them laughing at its complexity. It was a start. Helena had withdrawn, focusing on her own life, maintaining a civil distance. The war was over, leaving behind a field of scars and the possibility of a lasting peace. Leah came back and sat beside him. They drank their hot chocolate in a comfortable silence, watching the winter sun cast long shadows across the park. "Dad," Leah said, the word still sounding new and precious. He turned to her. "Yes, sweetie. Do you still get sad sometimes?" Arthur considered the question. The ache of regret for his years of neglect was still there. It was a scar he would carry forever, but it was no longer the paralyzing pain of despair. It was a pain that reminded him of what was important. "Yes, Leah, I do, but it's a different kind of sadness now. It's a sadness that reminds me to be grateful. Grateful for you. Grateful for every single day." She smiled, a full, radiant smile that held no trace of hunger or fear. "Me too. I'm grateful for the pizza." They laughed together. The pizza, the symbol of everything. The treasure found in the trash that turned out to be the most valuable of all. It wasn't just food. It was an act of generosity from a soul rich in hope to one poor in purpose. Arthur Sterling had learned the hard way that true wealth wasn't in accumulating, but in giving away. That true fatherhood wasn't about providing, but about being present, and that sometimes you have to lose the empire you built to find the kingdom that truly matters, a place in the heart of a family, however imperfect and unlikely it may be.